we need to talk about weed. For over a century, cannabis has been painted as public enemy number one, the gateway drug, the destroyer of youth, the lazy stoner's best friend. Entire generations were told it would ruin your brain, your future, and probably your moral compass. But in the last decade, something big has shifted. One by one, countries and states have been tearing down the old laws. Just recently, Germany legalized it. Across the US, Canada, and parts of Europe, dispensaries are now as common as coffee shops. And for good reason, compared to legal drugs like alcohol, which will kill about 1 in 20 people this year, cannabis looks almost tame. It doesn't cause fatal overdoses, it's less toxic, and for many people, it even has medical benefits. So it's not surprising that public opinion has swung hard in the opposite direction. These days, if you follow social media, you might think weed is basically a harmless herb with nothing but upsides. But here's the thing, that's not the whole story. Because for decades, strict prohibition made it incredibly hard for scientists to actually study cannabis, especially its long-term effects. Research was blocked by red tape, small sample sizes, and outright bans. Only in recent years have we started to get a clearer picture. And while weed is still far less dangerous than alcohol, the latest data reveals it's more addictive than we thought, and heavy long-term use can have real downsides. This isn't about fear-mongering. We think cannabis should be legal, but legalization comes with a responsibility to treat it honestly as what it is, a drug. One with unique benefits, but also unique risks. So today, we're going to set aside the hype, the memes, and the propaganda, and take an unfiltered look at what the science says about modern cannabis. Spoiler, it's not all good news. The star ingredient in cannabis is THC tetrahydrocannabinol, the chemical that gets you high. THC binds to cannabinoid receptors in your brain, tinkering with everything from mood and perception to coordination and short-term memory. It can make colors pop, time-stretch music sound incredible, or if you overdo it, make you paranoid, dizzy, and glued to the couch. Here's where things get interesting and maybe a little concerning. The THC levels in cannabis today are nothing like they were in your parents' or grandparents' era. Back in the 1970s, a typical joint in the US had around 2 to 4% THC. By the 1990s, that number had crept into the high single digits. But in the last couple of decades, the game has changed entirely. Thanks to selective breeding and modern cultivation, THC concentrations in both legal and illegal markets have more than doubled. In many places, 15–25% THC flower is now the norm. And that's before we even talk about edibles, oils, wax, shatter, and other concentrates that can hit 60% THC or more. The market has been chasing and supplying higher highs. Products with less than 15% THC are disappearing, replaced by ultra-potent strains and extracts that are in some cases stronger than anything nature ever produced. The problem? Pretty much every potential downside of cannabis use gets worse at higher THC doses. The more potent the product, the easier it is to overshoot your comfort zone, and the harder it is to keep your tolerance low. High doses can trigger anxiety, panic attacks, and in extreme cases, full-blown psychotic episodes, especially in people predisposed to mental health issues. At the same time, more people than ever are using cannabis regularly. In the US, for the first time in recorded history, daily cannabis use has actually surpassed daily alcohol use. Canada reports similar trends in 2018. 22% of people aged 16 and older used cannabis. By 2022, that number had jumped to 26%. Now, to be fair, we can't pin all of this on legalization alone. Studies are mixed in some places. Usage spiked after legalization. In others, it stayed stable. The truth is, the upward trend started long before legal markets back in the 1990s. But legalization has made access easier, supply more varied, and THC levels higher than ever. So here's where we're at. More people are using more weed more often, and it's the strongest it's ever been in human history. That combination has consequences, and we're already seeing them. Next, we need to talk about one of the most persistent myths in cannabis culture, the idea that weed isn't addictive. The science says otherwise. One of the most common claims you'll hear from cannabis fans is weed isn't addictive. And for most people, that feels true. the majority of users can enjoy it, occasionally put it down for weeks or months, and never feel a craving. But here's what the research actually shows: about 2 in 10 regular users develop what's called Cannabis Use Disorder, CUD for short. Around 1 in 10 experience it so severely that it impacts their daily life. CUD isn't about moral weakness or lack of willpower. It's a medically recognized condition with symptoms like needing more and more to feel the same effect tolerance, feeling irritable, anxious, or restless when you stop, using weed even when it's causing problems in your life, spending a lot of your time getting high or recovering from it. The 3 biggest risk factors are high THC levels. The stronger the product, the greater the risk. Frequency: the more often you use, the more your brain adapts. Age: when you start, the younger you begin, the higher your lifetime risk. Daily heavy use changes your baseline. Over time, your brain's reward system adapts, making sober life feel a little flat. Things that used to excite you, hobbies, social events, creative projects, may feel muted. That's when you start needing weed just to feel normal, not even to get high. And here's a sneaky trap: loneliness and heavy weed use often reinforce each other. If you're already feeling isolated, cannabis can take the edge off that feeling, but it can also make you more socially withdrawn. Over time, this can spiral into self-isolation, which deepens both the loneliness and the dependence. Some heavy users also report a kind of mental numbness days, filled with low-effort, mildly entertaining activities. You're not miserable, but you're not really thriving either. Boredom, which normally pushes you to try new things, gets dulled. Quitting becomes harder because without weed, your day feels dull and unmotivated. And if you do try to quit, withdrawal is a real hurdle, especially for daily users. Physical symptoms can include headaches, chills, loss of appetite, stomach issues, and trouble sleeping. Mentally, you might feel irritable, anxious, restless, or downright depressed. Even vivid, sometimes disturbing dreams can be part of the package. For most people, these symptoms peak within the first week and fade over a few weeks. But during that time, the temptation to go back is strong. None of this means everyone who smokes will get addicted, far from it. But if you find yourself needing it daily, feeling worse without it, or losing interest in things you used to enjoy, it's a sign worth paying attention to. And that brings us to the next big question. What's weed doing to your brain in the long run, especially if you start young? When it comes to cannabis and the brain, the science is complicated. Researchers don't all agree on the scale of long-term harm. And part of the problem is that for decades, prohibition made it nearly impossible to do large long-term studies. But here's what we do know. THC, the psychoactive compound in cannabis, interacts directly with your brain's endocannabinoid system. This system helps regulate mood, memory, motivation, decision-making, and more. When THC floods it regularly, it can alter brain chemistry and potentially brain structure. Some of these changes may reverse after you quit, or they might not. Right now, we just don't have a definitive answer. What's clearer is the list of short to medium-term effects heavy users often report. Memory problems, forgetting names, losing your train of thought mid-sentence, or struggling to recall recent events. Slower learning information, takes longer to stick. Weakened attention span, harder to stay focused on a task. Impaired decision-making, increased risk-taking, or trouble weighing pros and cons. Lower impulse control, reacting before thinking things through. For many adults, these effects fade or improve significantly after quitting. But there's one group that faces much higher risks: teenagers. If you start using heavily in your teens, especially before your mid-20s, when the brain is still developing, the potential downsides multiply. Teens who use frequently are far more likely to develop cannabis addiction later in life. They also tend to have worse academic performance, are less likely to finish school, and on average, report lower life satisfaction. And the risks go beyond grades and motivation. There's strong evidence linking early heavy cannabis use to higher chances of developing mental health disorders later in life, including depression, anxiety, psychosis, and even schizophrenia. These risks are even greater with high THC products like concentrates. The big takeaway here is timing: the younger you start, and the more potent the weed, the higher the odds of lasting impact. This doesn't mean adults are immune. Heavy use at any age can dull cognitive function, but the developing teenage brain is especially vulnerable. It's also worth noting that some people may be genetically predisposed to cannabis-triggered mental health issues. For them, Even occasional high-potency use could be risky. Unfortunately, you often don't know you're in that category until it happens. So, while weed in moderation might be relatively low risk for most adults, the science is loud and clear on this point. If you're a teenager, regularly using cannabis, especially potent strains, is a gamble with your mental health and cognitive future. Next, let's wrap things up by taking everything we've learned and boiling it down to a balanced takeaway, one that recognizes cannabis for what it really is, neither a miracle plant nor a harmless hobby, but a drug with both real upsides and real downsides. So after cutting through decades of hype propaganda and half-truths, where does that leave us? Cannabis is not the villain it was made out to be. It's not going to instantly ruin your life, rot your brain, or turn you into a criminal. Compared to alcohol, it's still dramatically less toxic and far less likely to kill you. For most adults who use it in moderation, it's not a major health risk. But it's also not the flawless, consequence-free plant some people make it out to be. Modern weed is stronger than ever, more widely available than ever, and yes, it can be addictive. Heavy long-term use can mess with your memory, motivation, and mental health. For teenagers, the risks are much higher and the potential consequences more lasting. Legalization doesn't mean harmless. It means we have the freedom and the responsibility to be honest about both the benefits and the risks. For 7 or 8 out of 10 users, cannabis is a manageable part of life. But for the other 2 or 3, it can quietly take more than it gives. If you're curious to try it, wait until your 20s. If you already use it, pay attention to how it's affecting you. And if you notice it's starting to dull your life instead of enhancing it, that's your cue to cut back. Weed isn't the devil, but it's also not a toy. Treat it with respect, and it'll treat you better.